I never expected Veterans Day to hit me like this. Not after 53 years. Not after all the parades I've attended, all the ceremonies where I stood with other veterans, our hands over our hearts, remembering those who didn't make it home. But this year was different. This year, my grandson Tommy asked me a question I'd spent half a century trying to forget. It was a crisp November morning in Portland, Oregon. The kind of day where the air smells like rain even when the sky is clear, and the fallen leaves create a golden carpet across the neighborhood. I was in my garage, the same garage where I've spent countless hours tinkering with old engines and avoiding difficult conversations. The American flag hung on the wall, the one they'd given me at my retirement ceremony from the Army in 1978. Next to it, my shadow box with medals I rarely looked at anymore. Tommy, my daughter Sarah's boy, had just turned 14. He was at that age where curiosity meets understanding, where childhood questions give way to something deeper. He'd walked into the garage carrying his phone, probably working on some school project about Veterans Day. I was organizing my toolbox, my hands busy with wrenches and screwdrivers, when he approached. "Grandpa," he said, his voice carrying that mixture of hesitation and determination that reminded me so much of his mother at that age. "Can I ask you something about Vietnam?" I felt my chest tighten. Over the years, I'd become skilled at deflecting these questions, at offering sanitized versions of my service that satisfied curiosity without revealing truth. But something in Tommy's eyes told me this wouldn't be one of those conversations. "Sure, buddy," I said, keeping my focus on the toolbox. "What do you want to know?" He sat down on my workbench, his legs swinging slightly. "Mom said you served in the Marines. She said you were in some pretty intense combat." "That's right. I was there from 1969 to 1971. Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines." The words came automatically, facts I'd recited 1,000 times. Tommy nodded, but he wasn't satisfied. I could see him gathering courage for the real question. "There's this thing I've always wondered about. When I was younger, maybe 8 or 9, I was staying over at your house. I couldn't sleep, so I came downstairs for water. I saw you outside near the fire pit, burning something. A letter, I think. You were crying." The wrench slipped from my hand, clattering against the concrete floor. The sound echoed in the garage like a gunshot. And for a moment, I was back in the jungle, hearing the crack of rifle fire through the trees. I bent down slowly to pick it up, buying myself time. "I never told anyone," Tommy continued, his voice softer now, "but I've thought about it a lot, especially as I got older. On Veterans Day, we're supposed to honor and remember, but it seems like you're trying to forget something. Why did you burn that letter, Grandpa?" I straightened up, looking at my grandson, really looking at him. He wasn't a little boy anymore, and he deserved more than deflection. But how could I explain something I still didn't fully understand myself? How could I tell him about the weight of decisions made in the chaos of war, about the letters that haunt you more than the bullets? "Tommy," I began, then stopped. Outside, I could hear the neighborhood coming alive with Veterans Day preparations. Someone was playing patriotic music down the street. A car drove by with a small flag fluttering from its antenna. All these symbols of honor and remembrance, and here I was, face to face with the one memory I'd tried hardest to burn away. "It's complicated," I finally said, the words feeling inadequate even as they left my mouth. "I'm 14, Grandpa. I can handle complicated." I set down the toolbox and leaned against the workbench, my mind racing back through the decades. The garage around us seemed to fade, replaced by memories of heat and humidity, of red dirt and dense jungle, of young men far from home trying to make sense of an impossible situation. "The letter," I said slowly, "was from a soldier in my unit. His name was Private First Class Marcus Chen. We called him Chen. He was 18 years old, from San Francisco. Smart kid, always reading books when we had downtime. He wanted to be a teacher when he got home." Tommy leaned forward, sensing that this was the truth he'd been waiting for. "Chen wrote that letter the night before an operation, November 12, 1970. He gave it to me and asked me to keep it safe, to mail it for him if—" I paused, the words sticking in my throat. "If anything happened to him." The garage was silent except for the distant sounds of celebration outside. I could see the question forming on Tommy's face, but he waited, giving me space to continue. "The operation went wrong. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. We walked into an ambush in a valley near Da Nang. The enemy had the high ground, and we were pinned down for hours. Chen was right next to me when it happened. One moment he was returning fire, the next—" I closed my eyes, seeing it all again with terrible clarity. "The next moment he was gone." Tommy didn't speak. He just sat there, and I was grateful for his silence. Talking about Vietnam had always been like trying to describe colors to someone who'd only ever seen black and white. But now, with my grandson looking at me with those earnest eyes, I found words I'd buried for decades forcing their way to the surface. I walked over to an old filing cabinet in the corner of the garage, one I'd kept locked for years. My hands trembled slightly as I worked the combination. Inside were things I'd never shown anyone. My old dog tags, some photographs I couldn't bring myself to destroy but couldn't bear to display, and a small wooden box. After Chen died, I kept that letter, I said, opening the box. Inside were other mementos, but I didn't take anything out. I just needed Tommy to see that I hadn't forgotten, that the burning didn't erase everything. I carried it with me for the rest of my deployment. Through every patrol, every firefight, every long night when sleep wouldn't come, it was in my breast pocket right over my heart. I closed the cabinet and returned to the workbench. The morning light was streaming through the garage windows now, creating long shadows across the floor. Sarah's car pulled into the driveway. She was probably coming to pick up Tommy, but neither of us moved. When I finally came home in 1971, I had every intention of delivering that letter personally to Chen's family. I had his home address. I'd looked them up in the San Francisco phone book. I even drove to their house once, parked across the street, and sat there for 2 hours, but I couldn't make myself get out of the car. Why not? Tommy asked gently. Because I was his sergeant. I was responsible for those men, and I'd made a decision that day, a tactical call about which route to take into that valley. Command had given us options, and I chose the one that seemed safest, but I was wrong. My choice led us straight into that ambush. Chen died because of my decision. The words hung in the air between us. I'd never said them out loud before, not to the therapists at the VA, not to my wife Martha before she passed, not even to Sarah. But here in this garage on Veterans Day morning, they came spilling out to a 14-year-old boy who'd asked a simple question about a burning letter. What did the letter say? Tommy asked. I shook my head. I never read it. That was Chen's private thoughts to his family. I had no right, but I could guess. He probably told them he loved them, that he was proud to serve, that he hoped to see them soon. All the things we all wanted to say but never quite found the words for, until it was almost too late. Sarah knocked on the garage door frame. Hey, you two, am I interrupting? Just talking, sweetheart, I said, managing a smile. Tommy's doing a project on Veterans Day. She looked between us, sensing something deeper had occurred, but respecting the boundary. Well, the ceremony at the memorial starts at 11. Are you both coming? I'll be there, I said. Tommy nodded too. After Sarah went back inside to help her mother with breakfast, Tommy stood up but didn't move toward the door. You still haven't told me why you burned it, Grandpa. I took a deep breath. For 27 years I carried the guilt of Chen's death. Every November, especially around Veterans Day, it would get worse. I'd see his face, hear his laugh, remember how he'd quote poetry while we were waiting for helicopters, or how he'd share his care packages with everyone in the squad. And that letter became a symbol of everything I couldn't fix, couldn't change, couldn't make right. So you destroyed it? I thought if I burned it, maybe I could finally let go of the guilt. Maybe I could stop seeing his face every time I closed my eyes. It was 2002, the night before Veterans Day. Your grandmother had gone to bed and I'd been sitting in my study, drinking whiskey and looking at that letter for hours. Then I went outside and lit the fire pit. I met Tommy's eyes. I stood there and watched it burn, thinking it would bring me peace. But you know what I realized as the paper turned to ash? Burning that letter didn't erase anything. Chen was still gone. My guilt was still there. And now I'd destroyed the last piece of him I had, the last words he'd wanted to share with his family. I'd failed him twice, once in that valley, and again 32 years later. Tommy absorbed this information, his young face serious. Have you ever tried to contact his family, even without the letter? No, I admitted. I told myself I'd destroyed the only thing that mattered, so what was the point? But the truth is, I was still a coward, still afraid to face them, to see their pain, and know I was part of its cause. The sound of sizzling bacon drifted from the house. Normal, everyday life continuing while we stood in this garage unpacking decades of buried pain. Tommy looked thoughtful, the way kids do when they're processing something that challenges their understanding of the world. Can I tell you what I think? He asked. I nodded, curious and slightly apprehensive about what wisdom a 14-year-old might offer. I think you're wrong about being a coward. You made a decision in an impossible situation. People make decisions every day. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But you didn't run away. You carried that guilt for 53 years. That's not cowardice, I don't know what it is exactly, but it's not that. His words struck something deep inside me. Your generation sure is different from mine. Maybe, Tommy said with a small smile. But here's another thing. My history teacher, Mr. Roberts, he's a veteran too, Afghanistan. He told us that Veterans Day isn't just about honoring the fallen, it's about honoring the ones who came back too. He said sometimes the harder battle is the one you fight after you come home. I felt my throat tighten. Your Mr. Roberts sounds like a smart man. He also said that the veterans who struggle the most are usually the ones who cared the most, the ones who took their responsibility seriously. Tommy paused. I think Private Chen would understand that you made the best decision you could with the information you had, and I think he'd forgive you for burning the letter. You can't know that. No, Tommy agreed, but you can't know he wouldn't either. We stood there in the garage, 2 generations separated by decades and experiences, yet somehow connected by this conversation. Outside, I heard more cars driving by, probably heading to the Veterans Day ceremony. The whole town would be there, gathering to remember and honor. Tommy, I said finally, thank you for asking that question, for not letting me deflect it, like I've deflected so many others. It's been eating at me for years, wondering if you remembered what you saw, if you'd ask about it someday. I almost didn't, he admitted. I was worried it would upset you, but then I thought, what's the point of Veterans Day if we can't talk about the real stuff? All the ceremonies and flags and speeches, they're important, but so is this. So is understanding what our veterans actually carry. Sarah appeared in the doorway again. Breakfast is ready. And Dad, don't forget you're supposed to give a short speech at the ceremony. Commander Williams called yesterday to remind you. My stomach dropped. I'd forgotten about that. Every year they asked different veterans to speak, sharing brief remarks about service and sacrifice. This year was my turn, and I'd been dreading it for weeks. I don't know what I'm going to say, I confessed to Tommy after Sarah left. He thought for a moment. Maybe you could tell them about Private Chen. Not everything, but something. Maybe it's time. The idea terrified me, but it also felt right in a way I couldn't quite explain. For 53 years, I'd kept Chen's memory locked away, as if speaking his name would somehow diminish him or expose my failures. But Tommy was right. What was the point of all these ceremonies if we only honored the easy stories, the ones that didn't challenge or complicate our understanding of service and sacrifice? The Portland Veterans Memorial was crowded by the time we arrived. The November sky had cleared completely, leaving behind crisp blue skies and gentle sunshine that seemed almost apologetic for the cold. Rows of chairs faced the memorial wall, where the names of local service members who'd given their lives were etched in black granite. I'd attended this ceremony for years, but I'd never actually looked for Chen's name. I realized with a start that I didn't even know if it was here. Tommy stuck close to me as we made our way through the crowd. I saw familiar faces, other veterans from various conflicts. There was Jim Patterson, who'd served in Desert Storm, Linda Rodriguez, who'd done 3 tours in Iraq, young men and women from Afghanistan, some still in their 20s carrying wounds both visible and invisible. Commander Williams, the head of our local VFW post, spotted me and waved us over. Robert, good to see you. Your family saved seats up front. You'll speak after the color guard presents the colors, and we have the invocation. My mouth went dry. Tommy squeezed my arm. You've got this, Grandpa. Sarah and her husband Mike were already seated with their other 2 kids, Tommy's younger siblings. They made room for us, and we sat just as the ceremony began. The color guard, composed of high school JROTC cadets, marched out with precision, presenting the American flag with the seriousness of those who understand the weight of what they're holding, even if they've never carried it into combat. The invocation was given by a local pastor, words about sacrifice and service that I'd heard 100 times before. Then it was time for me to speak. As I stood and walked to the podium, my legs felt unsteady. The crowd before me was maybe 200 people, but it felt like thousands. I looked down at the note cards I'd prepared, filled with generic platitudes about honor and duty. Then I looked up and saw Tommy in the front row, his face encouraging and hopeful. I saw Sarah next to him, the daughter who'd grown up with a father who was physically present but emotionally distant, always held back by ghosts she couldn't see. And I saw all these other veterans, each carrying their own burdens, their own Chen-shaped holes in their hearts. I put the note cards in my pocket. Good morning, I began, my voice catching slightly. My name is Robert Matthews. I served with the Marines in Vietnam from 1969 to 1971. I paused, thrown by the slip. I'd almost said Chen's name instead of my own, but maybe that wasn't an accident. I've been coming to these Veterans Day ceremonies for decades, I continued, and every year I've struggled with what this day means. We talk about honor and sacrifice, about those who gave their lives for freedom, and those things are true and important, but there's something we don't always talk about. We don't always talk about the weight that survivors carry, the questions that haunt us, the decisions we made that we can never take back. The crowd was silent. I could see some of the older veterans nodding slightly. I served with a young man named Private First Class Marcus Chen. He was 18 years old, from San Francisco. He died in an ambush on November 12, 1970. I was his sergeant, and I made a tactical decision that day that led us into that ambush. For 53 years, I've carried the guilt of that decision. My voice was shaking now, but I pressed on. This morning, my grandson asked me a question about something he saw years ago, something I thought I'd hidden from everyone. And in answering him, I realized something. Veterans Day isn't just about honoring those who died. It's also about finding a way to live with what we survived. It's about forgiveness, not just from others, but from ourselves. I looked directly at Tommy. I don't have all the answers. I still don't know if I've earned the right to forgive myself. But I know that keeping these stories locked away, letting them burn us from the inside, doesn't honor anyone's memory. Private Chen deserves to be remembered, not as a symbol of my failure, but as a young man who served his country with courage and dignity. I paused, gathering myself. So today, I want to honor his memory publicly. I want to say his name out loud and acknowledge that his sacrifice matters. Marcus Chen, 18 years old, he wanted to be a teacher. He loved poetry. He shared everything he had, and he deserved to come home. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't try to hide them. To all the veterans here today, I want you to know that it's okay to carry these burdens, but it's also okay to share them. It's okay to say the names of those we've lost and admit that their loss still hurts. That's not weakness. That's love, that's loyalty, that's the real meaning of service. I stepped back from the podium, unsure if I'd said too much or made any sense at all, but the applause that followed was warm and sustained. Several veterans stood, their faces reflecting understanding and recognition. They knew. They all knew about their own Chens, their own burning letters, their own 53 years of silence. After the ceremony, I was approached by more people than I could count. Other veterans wanted to share their stories, to tell me about the names they carried. Younger people thanked me for my honesty. But the most important moment came when an elderly woman with kind eyes touched my arm. "Excuse me," she said. "Did you say Marcus Chen from San Francisco?" My heart stopped. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Helen Chen. Marcus was my brother." The world seemed to tilt. Of all the impossible coincidences, that Chen's sister would be here in Portland at this ceremony, on this day when I'd finally spoken his name. "I moved here 30 years ago with my husband," she continued. "We come to this ceremony every year. Marcus's name is on that wall. I never thought I'd meet someone who served with him." I couldn't speak. Tommy appeared at my side, his hand on my back, steadying me. Helen smiled, though tears were in her eyes. "Thank you for remembering him. Thank you for saying his name. We received the official notification of his death, but we never knew much about his service, about who he was as a soldier. It's meant the world to hear you speak about him." "I'm so sorry," I managed to say. "I should have contacted your family years ago. I failed him. I failed you." She shook her head firmly. "You didn't fail anyone. You made a decision in an impossible situation, and you've carried that burden for over 50 years. That's not failure. That's love." She paused, then added, "Marcus would have wanted you to forgive yourself. He was like that, always worrying more about others than himself." We talked for nearly an hour after that, Helen and I, with Tommy listening intently. She told me stories about Marcus as a child, his love of books, his dreams of teaching. I shared memories of his service, the poetry he'd quote, how he'd kept everyone's spirits up, even in the worst conditions. We cried together and we laughed together, and slowly something that had been broken inside me for decades began to mend. As the crowd dispersed and the late morning sunshine warmed the memorial grounds, Tommy and I walked to the wall to find Chen's name. It was there, etched in granite. PFC Marcus Chen, November 12, 1970. I traced the letters with my finger, the stone cold and permanent beneath my touch. "I'm sorry I burned your letter," I whispered. "I'm sorry it took me so long to say your name out loud." Tommy stood beside me. "Do you think you'll ever stop feeling guilty, Grandpa?" I considered the question honestly. I don't know. Maybe guilt like this never fully goes away, but maybe that's okay. Maybe carrying it is how we honor them, as long as we don't let it destroy us. Helen seemed like she'd already forgiven you, Tommy observed. She did, I agreed, but the harder part is forgiving myself. We stood there in silence for a while, 2 generations connected by a question about a burning letter and a name that had been silent for too long. Around us, other families were having similar moments, touching names on the wall, sharing memories, crying and healing. Finally, Tommy spoke again. Thanks for telling me the truth, Grandpa. About Chen, about the letter, about everything. It helps me understand why Veterans Day matters. It's not just about the past. It's about how we carry it forward. I put my arm around his shoulder. You're a wise young man, Tommy. Much wiser than I was at your age, or at any age, really. I learned from the best, he said simply. As we walked back to join Sarah and the rest of the family, I felt something I hadn't felt in 53 years. A sense of peace. Not complete peace, maybe. The guilt would probably never fully leave. The questions about that day in Vietnam would always linger. But for the first time since November 12, 1970, I felt like I could breathe without that crushing weight on my chest. That night, back in my garage, I opened the filing cabinet again. I took out the wooden box and looked at the contents. Photographs, dog tags, a few letters from other Marines I'd served with. No letter from Chen, of course. That was gone, burned to ash years ago in a moment of desperate hope for peace. But maybe, I thought, burning that letter hadn't been the tragedy I'd always believed it to be. Maybe it had been necessary, a painful step in a journey toward healing that I hadn't been ready to complete until today, until a 14-year-old boy asked a question I'd been too afraid to answer. I took out a piece of paper and began to write, not trying to recreate Chen's lost letter, but writing my own. A letter to Marcus, telling him everything I should have said years ago. Apologizing, yes, but also thanking him. Thanking him for his service, for his friendship, for his sacrifice. Telling him about Helen, about how meeting her had helped close a wound that had been open for 5 decades. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box. I wouldn't burn this one. This one would stay, a testament to memory and healing, to the long road from guilt to forgiveness, to the power of finally speaking the names we've kept silent for too long. Tomorrow was just another day, but it would be the first day in 53 years when I woke up having spoken Chen's name out loud, having shared his story, having taken the first real steps toward forgiving myself. And somewhere, I hoped, Chen was finally at peace too. Not because I'd burned his letter or kept it or delivered it, but because his name was no longer a silent burden carried in the dark. It was a memory shared in the light, spoken with love and honor and the kind of respect he'd always deserved. Tommy's question had changed everything, not by providing answers, but by forcing me to confront the questions themselves. Why did I burn the letter? I still didn't know the full answer, but maybe finally that was okay.